So in this video, I'm demonstrating how to complete the Experiment 2 Smart Worksheet that goes with the Introduction to Lab Simulations experiment. So Smart Worksheets are not graded. However, it is recommended that you review them and complete them because it will help you to think about the data that you collected and the different observations that you saw while completing the procedure portion, and start to think about how to apply that to the questions that you could see in the post-lab assignment. And so as you go through, there are different parts of it. The first part is talking about the volume in the Erlenmeyer flask, the volume of air, as well as the pressure. This is data that you would have collected as you completed the procedure 2 for the experiment. And so with that procedure, you had to get your Erlenmeyer flask and close it where the lab simulation applied a stopper. And the key thing with that was that it told you that even though you were utilizing a 150 milliliter Erlenmeyer flask, the total volume was 182. So what that means is that if you had 0 water added, and you initially stoppered it, your total volume of air was 182. You then had to apply your pressure gauge, and at that time it was reading 1.00 atmosphere. And so once you enter in that data and submit, it'll let you know whether or not your data is within range. So the good thing about this Smart Worksheet is that it's going to let you know whether or not your data was correct before you get to your post-lab assignment. And so you would just go through, if your volume of water was 10, then that means that the total volume of gas had to be now 10 less. And so you would just go through, you would enter in this data. And so you'll go through and complete that based on the observations that you observed. I'll just go ahead and fill in this row. When I completed it, this is the pressure that I observed. And so again, once I submit, it's going to let me know whether or not my data is within range. And so from there, it's going to collect the data that you input and make it into a table. And then it's talking about the graph of pressure versus volume. So this is not anything that was in the content for this week's module. It's not anything that we really talk about in chemistry. Graphing is based on something that you would have discussed in a previous math class. And so when you're graphing, what you want to keep in mind is that when you're graphing data, we do two-dimensional, meaning x and y axis. So you have something on your x-axis and you have something on your y-axis. Your title of the graph gives you a clue as to what's where. So usually when you see the title of a graph, the first variable lets you know what's on your y-axis. Second variable generally indicates what's on your x-axis. Another way to think about your x and y-axis is dependent and independent variable. The x-axis is usually your independent variable. Your y-axis is usually your dependent variable. In other words, what's on the y depends on the value of x. And so here we have a graph of pressure versus volume. So our pressure changed depending on our volume. So our pressure was dependent on the volume of gas that was in the flask. So what that means is that our volume is our independent variable, or our x-axis. Our pressure is our dependent variable, or our y-axis. And so when it asks the question about the data to plot on your y-axis, because it's telling you to create a graph of pressure versus volume, we know that our two variables are going to be pressure and volume. So again, pressure dependent on the volume. And so on the x-axis, you're going to have volume. Just select it, click submit. It'll let you know if your selection is correct or not. On your y-axis, we're going to have pressure. Graph title, again, it's generally y versus x. Pressure was on our y, volume was on our x. And with this one, it also told you here, graph of pressure versus volume. And so once you select the data, if I had completed mine, it would go ahead and do the plot. And then based on that, you can determine whether or not it's inversely, logarithmically, exponentially, or directly proportional. Basically, when you're looking at the proportionalities, you have to look at the x and the y. So inversely means that opposite, as one goes up, the other goes down. When we're dealing with the log base, you generally see a decrease, but it's similar to the exponential. With the exponential, you kind of see a curve. And then with the direct, as one goes up, the other goes up. So you have to look at your data and determine which option is there. Again, you'll select your option, click submit. It'll let you know if it's correct or not. If you don't get a perfect score on the Smart Worksheet, that is fine. Again, it's not graded. And then when you get to the next portion, it's telling you now you're going to do a graph of 1 over the pressure versus volume. So what that means is that you're going to take the pressure that you initially had and you're going to do 1 divided by that value. So 1 divided by 1. Of course, 1 divided by 1 is still 1. So just put it in your calculator. And then my next pressure was 1.05. So in my calculator, I would have to put 1 divided by 1.058. When I put that in my calculator, I get 0.9452. Whatever your other pressures are, you'll do the same thing. 1 divided by those values. Then again, it's asking you to identify your X and Y axis. Look back at that title. Y is generally first, followed by X. So our X axis is still volume. So just select volume. But now we're plotting 1 over the pressure instead of just the pressure. And then technically, again, it already gave you the title. And then once you do that, it'll go through and it'll generate that plot for you. So you don't have to actually do the graph. If I had all of my data points, it would generate the graph for me. And then again, I would have to indicate the relationship between those points. And so that is how you complete the Smart Worksheet for Experiment 2 portion of the Introduction to Lab Simulations experiment. So I hope this helps.